Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances, the podcast where we take you down the rabbit hole into the fantastic world of the strange, the paranormal, and the unknown. I'm Morgan Knudsen.
And I'm Mike Browne. It's time to dim the lights and settle in. Come along with us on this week's adventure. And we've got Loyd Auerbach back. back.
We do.
Yeah.
And it's always so exciting to have him. I mean, he's known all over the world as Professor Paranormal and one of my all-time paranormal heroes as well, because he was one of the first parapsychologists on TV that I ever saw.
Yeah.
That started to inspire me to do what I'm doing now.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And he's just the way he presents things, it's just so digestible, you know, like he keeps things simple. He talks about things in ways that even a lunkhead like I can understand. And, you know, it's just like, I just love having conversations with him. And this time we're talking about his next book, a paranormal casebook, cases from a parapsychologist's first 25 or so years. And I mean, the or so is so Loyd.
Yeah, it's so Loyd. And this is the revision or the second edition of his original book of the same title. And he's added so much more in the book, which is really, really cool. And I think after having read this now a couple of times, hands down, if anybody out there is interested in this field or is an investigator themselves or considers themselves an investigator, you need this book. It is absolutely imperative. There's so much information in here that I think everybody that considers themselves interested in this world needs to have.
Well, let's talk to Loyd Auerbach.
Let's do it. Well, this is exciting, and I have spent this past couple of weeks piling through this incredible book, which has been published before, but this is the update of a paranormal casebook. And Loyd, thank you so much for coming to talk about this, because there is so much in here that people need to know.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's one of my favorite books. I'm actually looking at eventually doing a second volume. So,
oh, cool.
I'm really glad, because even apart from the cases, I mean, the cases are incredible. We'll get to some of those in a little bit. The information, even in the opening segment in the first section, I think is so important for people, especially those who are into ghost hunting, paranormal research, anything like that. This is really key for anybody that's into this. So let's talk about it. What inspired you to write it originally, and why did you decide to update it?
Well, originally the idea for the book came from, strangely enough, from a discussion I had with a publisher, the original publisher. It was the woman who ran Atriad Books out of Texas. We were at a conference put on up in Seattle by the A Ghost folks, and we bonded over a love of chocolate. So, which you may know.
Excellent.
And so as we're talking, she asked me if I'd ever written a book with a bunch of my cases, and I said no. I put a few of my cases in previous books, of course, but she said, "Hey, you know, let's do that. Let's put that book together." And as we were talking about it, it really made sense for me to kind of lay the groundwork, not just have the cases, but also lay the groundwork for what parapsychology is and what we think the models we think these things are. And then also, I get the very end of the book, as you saw, there's kind of a Q&A with myself about how I got into the field and all that, because people keep asking me those questions. So I figured I'm just going to put them in the book. It was easy.
It makes sense. And like you, I'm always getting repeat of the same questions. Usually most interviews sound exactly the same.
Yeah. It is really, sometimes it's very boring for me because I'm giving the same answer. It's kind of rote. The new edition, it just took me way too long to do that. The book went out of print after Ginny sold the business, sold Atriad Press. So the book came out in 2005. I think it was 2010 that she sold the business, and they decided not to reprint the book or keep it in print or do anything with it. The new folks, they were going to focus on books only centered on Texas.
Oh, gosh, okay.
Yeah, so it took me quite a while to realize, to really kind of have the time and energy and mental wherewithal And when I put it out again, the subtitle of the original one was called Ghost Hunting in the New Millennium, which really it wasn't, because the cases were mostly from the 90s and early 2000s. So I thought, as I was putting it together again, I did update the Q&A at the beginning and at the end, and then also did some edits on some and additional information, kind of updates on a couple of the cases that are there. And I just decided that a different subtitle made sense. So, the new subtitle is Cases from a Parapsychologist's First 25 or So Years. And the next edition will be Cases from the Rest, or cases I missed. I have a whole bunch of other things I can put in there.
Well, it's never ending. I mean, that's the one thing about you doing this is that, you write something and then within a very short order, you find out there's a new advancement or there's new information. I mean, it's just constantly evolving. We mentioned a little bit at the beginning about what is parapsychology and whatnot. And I thought one of the really important points that you made in this is that when people pick up this book, they're not going to read about REM pods and all this gear and gadgets and all the things that send us through the roof, and how little these types of things are actually used and how technology is actually used. So can we talk a little bit about that and why that is?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's remember that these are experiences that living humans have. I mean, we would not know that there are ghosts except that people see them, hear them, feel them. They have experiences. We would not know the places are haunted except that people have those experiences. So the idea is that looking at these as human experiences where you can't, we don't know what the energy is, if there's even an energy for ghosts. We don't know what consciousness is. So the focus for parapsychology and investigation and research is really about people's experiences and what living people can actually do. And then we kind of expand that out to do these other phenomena, apparitions, hauntings, poltergeists, so they have an impact on the actual physical environment. Is that a way we can determine if there's any correspondence to people's experiences? So even the use of an electromagnetic field detector, and there were forms of that used in the early 20th century with just a compass to see if in a ghost case, does the needle start flipping around or something like that. So early ghost hunters did actually do that, but they were really, again, looking to see what was affecting the environment when someone had an experience or determined or said that there was a ghost present or there's a haunting here. The EMF meters became affordable in the 1980s, so I started using them again, specifically because there was already a correlation between measurement of or changes in the Earth's magnetic field locally to various kinds of psychic experiences. And we were trying to see what happens when somebody's experiencing a ghost. But unfortunately, because these devices are often, are environmental in nature, there are other things in the environment that affect the readings that you might pick up with most devices that have nothing to do with ghosts or hauntings or poltergeists or anything else. So we also have to approach this from the fact that there's no device that can be designed right now to detect these things because we don't know what we're trying to detect. However, we can use environmental sensors when someone is having an experience versus when they're not to say, oh, the environment changes here when people are seeing the ghosts, but it's not changing at all when they're not. Or sometimes there's a normal explanation that allows it to change when they're not experiencing it. So we only look at the ones when they are experiencing something.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's so frustrating as we've talked about in the past, just on these TV shows and things like that, where people are, making these light up gadgets that don't really record much of anything.
Or they're overpriced. The REM pod is basically a $20 theremin kit.
Yep.
In a nice case, the casing itself probably costs more. In fact, it does cost more than the innards of that device. And it's very frustrating because obviously there's a whole industry now that sells to ghost hunters. Just by slapping the word spirit or ghost on something, they can jack up the price like a lot.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that the TV shows, they're looking for something visual to show. So they don't care if it really works or not. The producers do not care.
No.
In fact, they'll say they do. I'm actually frankly surprised that in the 1980s, when I had a director who was really pressing me on using, do you have any devices that do that show, that light up, that do this stuff? I would pull out a toy tricorder, Star Trek tricorder,
Yeah.
and would turn it on, and it makes noise, and it makes, it has lights up and stuff. And inevitably, the sound guy and the camera guy knew exactly what I was doing, and when
Mhm.
they would stop rolling, but pretend like they still are, just because they were annoyed by the director also.
That's fantastic. Oh my, and kudos to them if they're out there listening to this. Thank you. The other point that you made in here, which I thought was really great before we kind of get into the cases, was about photography
Mhm.
and the idea that the spirit is actually, or the phenomenon is affecting the photo, that the camera itself isn't capturing a ghost through a flash or
Right.
through those normal means, that this is actually that's not what's happening here. So can we touch on that a bit? Because that's, I think, is so cool for people to understand.
Yeah, it's important, first of all, for people to know how a camera actually works. It really can't pick up what we can't see with the naked eye. That's
Yeah.
one thing. And it's pretty clear that ghosts are not optical. Otherwise, everyone would see them. When one person is seeing them, everybody else would see them too. And there are situations on the record where people, more than one person is seeing the ghost, but they're looking in different directions. And in each instance, they're seeing the ghost facing them, which makes no sense at all if there's only one ghost there and doesn't have clones or something like that. It makes sense if it's a mental image that you're receiving, which means it has to do with ESP. It's not just your ESP, it's their ESP. It's a psychic phenomenon. So that's
Yeah.
important, number one. And number two, if there is anything unusual that we can, say we connect to the ghost experience, it is because someone or something is affecting the device, the camera itself, if it's digital, the recording medium, the film, but it has to correlate or connect to an actual experience somebody's having.
Hmm.
An anomalous photo when nobody's having an experience, and I get them all the time. I usually ask people when they send me a weird photo, what made you think this is psychic, paranormal, ghostly, or whatever? And they rarely ever have an answer. They say, I don't know, it's just really a weird photo, which is basically
Right.
the response. It's a weird photo. There's probably something going on here. I see things like people talk about the full spectrum cameras capturing ultraviolet. You would have to have a lens that allows ultraviolet light to go through, because all lenses for cameras, unless they're specially made, block ultraviolet. It doesn't matter if the camera says it's picking up ultraviolet, the lens itself blocks ultraviolet light.
Right.
And those lenses cost like $2,000-$3,000. So that's not what's happening. And people really need to look into the optics here, or even for EVP, what actually is happening audio wise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know when I was doing my some of my tours a couple summers ago, I actually brought a professional photographer with me to explain some of this to people,
Oh, good.
because yeah, because exactly like what you're saying, people just don't understand how the cameras are working. Everything from basic, the things that they think they're capturing, like orbs or
Oh.
something like that, right? Because those are usually the pictures I know that I get,
Mhm.
are people coming and saying this is, oh, it's an orb, it's the ghost of, dead Aunt Betty or whatever, and it's of course either pollen or dust or humidity or something's going on. But that, yeah, it got to the point where I was bringing a photographer with me, because I was like, he's going to be able to explain this better than I can.
Sure,
uh,
sure. And actually, back in the 90s, after the orb phenomena really got started by the International Ghost Hunter Society, it was not something that came out of nowhere or had anything to do with spirits. It was a pronouncement that Dave Oster made on a TV show and promoted in the International Ghost Hunter Society, that orbs are spirits. Didn't make any sense. And actually, Fujifilm had a page on their website for quite some time explaining focal lengths and how orbs get formed when you take a picture with a flash.
Wow.
that's amazing. They should have kept it up.
Yeah. Well, it's not like they were getting a lot of visitors, except those of us who happen to be slightly interested. Certainly not the people who were promoting the orb thing or thought they had orb pictures. They did not want to see a normal explanation.
No, rarely do they, I
Yeah,
find.
it's true. Yeah.
It's so true. So yeah, so I think the important thing about this book to me is that it really emphasizes the fact that the living really, really have a role here with all of this, that it's not just this phenomenon that's sort of out there that's being inflicted on us somehow, which I think is how it's often portrayed, that people are just being somehow exposed to or victimized by something that they can't control. And I love that about this. So why do you think that people are so likely to think that this is all outside phenomenon, that this is all something out there? Is it just the way this is being portrayed in media and things like that?
Well, there's a long tradition of ghost stories, going back probably to ancient, farther back than ancient times. There's a good book by, it's Irving Fine, called First Ghosts, that actually examines the ghost story and legends in Mesopotamia. It's some of the oldest cultures. So the idea of life after death, we know that Neanderthals would bury people with their stuff. As far as we know, we assume that's because they would need it in the afterlife. We don't really know for sure because, of course, you can't really interview them anymore. But pop culture, certainly in the 20th century, and even actually starting with the advent of spiritualism and the shift in the way the ghost story is told. In some respects, Charles Dickens had a huge influence on modern ghost stories, not just with A Christmas Carol, but with several of his other stories. And he did do investigations himself with the London Ghost Club. So we have pop culture, literature, certainly to some extent radio and its popularity, and then movies for sure, have affected the way people think not only ghosts behave, but also the phenomena in general. Some of it comes from spiritualism. The whole going in the dark thing
Right.
has
Yep.
nothing to do with reality. It has everything to do with, especially phony spirit mediums in the latter part of the 19th century, early 20th century, going into the dark because they could have more fakery happen in the dark than if they had the lights on.
Sure.
And that became folklore. There's folklore about cold spots. That comes from pop culture. It does not come from anything else. It does come from, however, people have feeling a cold chill sometimes, even if the temperature doesn't change. But the idea of the room suddenly dropping in temperature, that comes from movies more than any place else. So we have this
Interesting.
folklore that's been created. We have a new folklore thanks to the reality shows that's happening.
Right. Yeah.
Oh gosh, isn't that the truth?
Yeah,
Well, let's
people watch those shows and like suddenly they think if they hear a weird noise and it feels creepy that there must be a demon in their house, and that's from TV.
oh, our favorite word.
Yeah.
It's just, oh gosh, it's so overused. So let's get into this. Let's talk about some of these cases because there was a good number of them. I mean, all of them were so enjoyable, but there was a few that really stuck out to me. And one of the first ones was the Black Knight of Petaluma,
Mhm.
which was your first case.
Right. That
Can you
was my
talk
first
about
one.
this case a little bit? Because this is really interesting and has a lot of lessons in it.
Yeah, I mean, it had a lot of layers to it. We got this call from a woman. This is back when I was in graduate school. In fact, that was, I think it was October of 1979, my first semester at JFK University in the graduate parapsychology program. And we were taking a class was being offered on field investigations. So uh, the head of the department they would get these calls, the faculty would get these calls, and usually they would go out on them or send students who had already been through the course. So we get this call that it's a woman and her daughter, for the most part, living in this older home in Petaluma, California, north of San Francisco. There's phenomena of physical activity, things moving around, windows opening and closing on their own. But the big thing the woman was reporting was that she was seeing the apparition of a man in black armor. And it felt very negative to her. And she said her 16-year-old daughter, who was living in the house with her, saw it as well. One of the other students and I went up and we interviewed the mother and daughter. The daughter had a twin brother who would be at the house sometimes, but he was a juvenile delinquent. He was in juvie hall actually. And then there were two older daughters who were out of school. One of them had been, I think she had just graduated from college, and the other one had been out for a little while. So there's a little bit of a span between the older daughters and the younger ones as well. The woman was divorced when the twins were born. Shortly after that, the husband and the woman split. So he wasn't around at all when the two youngest were growing up. And the woman said, basically was talking about the fact that on occasion she would see this man in black armor standing at the end of her bed, um, just in the bedroom upstairs. And he would be there sometimes at different times. And then she did say that, my daughter has seen him as well. And the 16-year-old said, yes, although later on we found out not as often as the mother said. And in our second visit, we found out that the Black Knight had not really been seen by the two older daughters, although the mother had said yes. They did tell us that they were kind of humoring her a little bit. But there were some interesting factors around this. Number one, there was reported physical phenomena, which they had all experienced, including the older ones. They had seen it when they were home once in a while. And the other thing is that that was kind of key to us was that there was one time that the mother saw the Black Knight figure with the visor up, and it was her son's face. So that was pretty interesting as well. It was weird for her. So we kind of looked at, first of all, the physical phenomena. We thought, well, there's a 16-year-old girl, that's the stereotype. Maybe she's causing it. It took a while, a second visit as well, talking to a counselor who was working with the son in juvie hall, just a number of factors, and it really boiled down to the idea, especially after Tom and I went under the house, we went through the entire house. We go under the house, the crawl space, to see if there's any explanation for some of the physical phenomena coming from underneath. And it turned out that we find some toys that related to the boy when he was a kid. He grew up playing like knights in shining armor. So there's a shield, there's a toy sword. I kind of related to this because I had stuff like that when I was growing up. Yeah. And that probably is where the Black Knight came from. We knew right off the bat that a man in medieval black armor, it makes no sense that there would be either an imprint or a ghost doing that. What was kind of interesting was a comment the mother made, and she said, if I hadn't said before Star Wars, it was a Black Knight, but when I saw Star Wars, it's almost like I was seeing Darth Vader.
Right.
And the interesting thing is that, because this has been going on for years, the interesting thing is that George Lucas designed Darth Vader, or worked on the kind of suggested Darth Vader, as a Jungian archetype. One of the archetypes that Carl Jung talked about for humans is the shadow figure, which is often portrayed as a Black Knight in some cultures. Mm-hmm. And that was what Darth Vader was, a representation of the shadow. So there's something unconscious going on here as well. And we eventually determined that the mother was the poltergeist agent. We look at that kind of physical activity as coming from the unconscious of a living person because of her issues with her son. And the face was something that really kind of gave it away, that this was coming from her unconscious. She was projecting this idea of a Black Knight, which does sometimes happen in poltergeist cases, that she was causing the physical phenomena. It was typically whenever the son was home or she was talking to him, there was a direct relationship to her anxiety around her son's situation, all of that. So it was a really interesting case for us, kind of combining a more psychic projection of a figure that was picked up by the daughter or daughters, and then also the physical phenomena.
There seems to be, as parapsychology gains even a deeper understanding of consciousness and things like that, this seems to be often more of an explanation for some of these cases, is that there is some sort of either the living agent or there's some sort of psychokinetic thing that's going on within these homes. Do you find that as well? Is that people are sort of pulling away a little bit from the notion of I guess an external entity haunting the place, but that there's something more to what these people's psyches are creating?
There's definitely that piece of it. When we look at kind of phenomena overall, and we look at things like, residual hauntings, which frankly account for most of what people experience. Yeah. There can be a reaction to experiencing something that, people will react to, that kind of imprint of previous people living in the home. It has nothing to do with death. It is the living who leave those impressions behind. But depending on how people react to them, the anxiety may cause them to become living agents in psychokinesis activity, poltergeist cases. We've had cases where the frustration, stress, the thing that causes the physical activity is actually the residual haunting that somebody picked up on. Or sometimes I had a couple of cases where it was the apparition, the appearance of a conscious apparition that caused someone in the family to react in a negative way out of fear, and that caused psychokinetic activity. The apparition was not causing it, it was caused by one of the people in the home, although the stimulus for that was the apparition or the haunting phenomena. So these things can be a lot more complicated than just saying, oh, it's just residual, oh, it's just an apparition doing this stuff.
Oh yeah. No, I mean I've been in those similar situations where you really have to get in there and unravel the sort of the psychology of what's going on in every
Mhm.
single case. And I thought it was really interesting with this case where you talked about identifying particular sensations that were that you found differed from case to case. In a situation like this, when you've got something that is likely predominantly psychokinesis or is something similar to that, what do you attribute some of these sensations to, or do you get them?
I think in the book I've mentioned that when we were there, um, we did kind of parse through all the things that we were being told.
Yeah.
One was related to their dog supposedly picking things up from upstairs and not wanting to go upstairs. Frankly, the dog was a little tiny dog that couldn't even get up on the couch and was getting old and was looking at the stairs in fear, not because there was something upstairs, but because the dog had a hard time getting up the stairs
Yeah.
Or
at
no.
that age. It was real. Yeah, I felt really bad. But as I was going up the stairs, I'm behind the woman. We're going to go upstairs and look at the bedrooms. And she's going to show us the bedroom that had this where she saw the Black Knight. I actually felt myself being, it was a really weird sensation. I felt myself being pulled, and I actually walked into the one bedroom without being told which bedroom it was. Walked in and stood apparently pretty much where the Black Knight stood. So somehow unconsciously, I was picking up on the imprint. She was leaving impression behind by projecting this Black Knight. So I'm using, my unconscious ESP to pick up where that is. And this has happened to me a number of times over the years. I working at the American Society for Psychical Research with Alex Tanis, who was an amazing psychic and medium. Um, he kind of, I spent a lot of time with him just talking about being psychic and such, and it really opened me up to possibilities and to paying attention to what I felt in cases. And so I would sometimes feel things in various cases that would be confirmed by the psychic. I never operate as a psychic, but I sometimes let my own sensations guide things a little bit.
Is it possible for just any old person to develop that kind of thing? I mean,
Yeah, simple answer is yes. You just you have to kind of get past everything we're told as we're growing up and get past it being weird. I mean, the thing is that if people accepted psychic experience as normal, a normal part of the normal range of human experience, then the fear would probably drop away, but also the idea of oneself being somewhat psychic would also drop away. I do teach a developing intuition, it's really a developing ESP course through the Ryan Education Center. And that's part of the process that we kind of go through is taking some simple tasks and really understanding what the role of belief and disbelief is in blocking us from being psychic, and how that comes from everything from our family telling us this stuff's not real or you can't possibly be psychic to education system, the mainstream, the culture, pop culture, all of these things kind of put a damper on kids developing their psychic abilities from where they are when they're little, because little kids are actually very psychic, typically. So we can all get past those. It's really not about developing, it's about redeveloping.
Oh yeah, I had just this past April, I was doing a workshop at a fan expo in Calgary, and I had this father and daughter stand up, and the daughter wasn't very old. She looked maybe 9, and it was the neatest thing because she was too nervous to come up and ask the question, so the dad came up with her and asked her question. And it was all about that. It was all she wanted to know, well, how do I know if there's something around, or like how can I connect in with
Mhm.
this stuff. And I thought it was such a progressive question for the dad to even be asking, and for this little girl to even be thinking about. And I really commended them for coming up and asking this question, because I said there's not many families that will take advantage of this, or their, their kids wanting to connect in and wanting to be in tune with this stuff. And it was so refreshing to have them come up and ask, because it was just really cool. But the next case that really stuck out for me, which I think was another important one for people to understand, was a living apparition. And this I thought was so unique. And I had an experience with this, or have been having an experience with this over the last couple of years, which has been really interesting. It really stood out to me. So can you talk about this one a little bit? Because this is really cool.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me mention that there is a category of apparitions we have in parapsychology, which is apparitions of the living,
Yeah.
where people have an experience, people have an experience of seeing someone who might be having an out-of-body experience. They might be dreaming. They could be in crisis. There's any number of reasons why that might actually happen. And this was a case, we were actually called into this case in Marin County, not because of an apparition. In fact, we only discovered they were seeing this apparition after we were there and dealing with some residual stuff that was kind of crappy, bad feeling kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
we went in blind, not knowing exactly what rooms they were feeling it, where in the garage they were feeling it. They did tell us the backyard, but everybody picked out the same spot. And it seemed to have to do with the previous owner, who was under suspicion by the local sheriff and law enforcement as having done some kind of drug dealing and gun dealing and all sorts of stuff. So some pretty, negative vibes, you might say, left behind. And when we were there, so the first time we kind of did an assessment, second time I brought back a psychic with me. And at that point, we were told by the couple that they'd been seeing the ghost of a little girl. As it started with their two kids who were 3 and 5, or 4 and 6. I can't recall off the top of my head. They started playing with this little girl who would pop into the room, and they would see it. The couple would see this little girl as well, and then she would disappear. And it was got to a point after a while that they were perfectly happy having the little girl around. And at one point, the mother told me that they were going out in their station wagon. They're going to drive away, and the little girl gets in the car with them. And as soon as they leave the driveway, the little girl's gone from the back of the car. So they had come to find out that the people who originally built their home 80 years before, it was actually one of two homes built by two brothers from Scotland. And they got to know the people who still family members of the original builder, living at the house up the street. So they got to know them, and eventually found pictures. The woman found pictures going through the house of the original owners and their two kids, their two little girls. So they took these pictures up to the family up the street, and it turns out that the identified little girl in the picture, the one that was the apparition, was actually upstairs in their house in home hospice care, a cousin that they were helping out, that they were dealing with. And so we were able to talk to the nurse and compare notes on timing. Was first interesting that the nurse said that the woman would go in and out of consciousness. She'd take naps or just simply be unconscious in some other way. And she would wake up. When she would wake up, she would talk about visiting the two little boys down the street. So we started looking at timing, and the times that the family down the street, the family we were dealing with, saw the little girl's ghost were times that the woman was asleep, dreaming, unconscious, or otherwise unconscious. And it really, in exploring this whole idea, when she talked about visiting the family as a little girl, I had the nurse asking these questions. She said that she was a little girl herself playing with them. So now we have like this really interesting correspondence between timing and the woman's own experiences. She was in her early 90s. She was dying of cancer. And it was this really amazing thing. So I suggested that the family bring the little boys up to visit her, and everybody was okay with that. And the woman was surprised. She identified the little boys by name.
Wow.
A really bizarre thing was we did see a picture of the original owner and his wife, and the current owners that we were dealing with, she looked so much like the original owner's wife, the mother of these two little girls. And actually, one comment, I personally, I think that's just totally it's not reincarnation, because the woman, the original owner, she died after this woman was born. So it was definitely not reincarnation or anything like that, just coincidence. She actually would remark about having visited the little boys, and actually the woman who looked like my mother. So this is all before they got together and knew this. So it kind of ended up being a really sweet situation with the family, until the first negative thing that happened was, I got a call from the woman saying that the woman up the street something's going on with her, because I saw her for the first time as an old woman. They'd already met.
Yeah.
She looked like she was in real pain. So I said, call the nurse, find out whether they've changed pain medication or changed something. And in fact, they had. And the suggestion was maybe talk to the doctor and put the old pain meds back on. And then it was back to a little girl. And eventually, the couple I was dealing with had a conversation with the nurse and the woman in hospice and the ghost at one point, the apparition, that maybe she could focus her mental energy on herself in her body and not spend that time. And she actually died not too long after. So they actually did not see the ghost after the woman died, which is really interesting.
That is fascinating. It's incredible what our consciousness is capable of doing. Do you think that this was some sort of astral projection that was going on? What do you think was going on here?
Yeah, so it's likely she was having an out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
We'll call astral projection, and the family was seeing her. They were probably psychically open, number one, to that, and I'm guessing that the elderly woman was really wanting to kind of recover some past experience of playing in the house, and now she's got two kids to play with. Memories of growing up in the house, basically.
I love this story, and it's so neat to me. I remember reading, because I'm a big fan of Neville Goddard, and and for people who don't know the name Neville Goddard, he was very much into all of this stuff, like in the idea of uh, uh, what you can manifest, what you can create, how you can use your consciousness through meditation. And the one story I remember him telling was that he had really wanted to go home. Most of his family was in Barbados. He lived in Greenwich Village in New York, and he had been falling asleep just imagining himself in Barbados with his family. And he got a call not too long later from I believe it was his brother or some of the family members, that said, "We actually saw you in the house."
Mm-hmm.
And they saw him walking around the house. And I thought that was just really cool. So that's what this reminded me of, was just that desire is a really amazing thing. And what I find so cool about this particular case, in Neville's case, they'd never had any interaction with him, but yet in this one, there was definitely some awareness. I mean, she woke up and remembered that she'd been there. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah, and there are other cases like that. They're often called bilocation cases. Alex Tannis had some really good stories. So there's some really interesting stories from all over the world, this kind of thing.
I've got one of my own, which is kind of weird. A few months ago, I was awakened in the middle of the night. I thought I heard my mom calling my name. She's one of the only people in the world who call me by my full name, Michael. And I woke up just like, oh, weird. I must have been dreaming or whatever. And I really, even though I do this show, I didn't think anything more of it until 2 days later. I found out that night, my mom had taken a fall in the middle of the night, broken her wrist, and had been knocked unconscious and come to later on in the morning in her bed. So she doesn't recall how she got back into bed or any of that kind of stuff. And it was very strange that, I heard her calling my name. I didn't see her, but it was something in my consciousness that was very strong. I haven't told her that, I heard that because she'd think I was insane, but
Yeah, it's really interesting. I had my own bilocation experiences, out of body kind of things that other people saw me when I was working at the ASPR in New York. I think kind of stimulated by like Stanix's experiences. And I've talked to many other people who had either the voice or seen somebody in crisis. This idea of crisis apparitions, where
Yeah.
someone is in crisis, in an accident or something else, and they appear, or the voice appears to people who are connected to them, usually loved ones. It's not uncommon. It's a psychic connection we have. And, one of the things that really frustrates me about the ghost hunting shows and many of the ghost hunters out there is a complete disconnect from the idea of ESP or psychokinesis in general,
Yeah.
of the living. And frankly, we wouldn't experience ghosts at all if we didn't have ESP.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really fundamental to all of this,
Yeah.
investigation. And what I love about these discussions and talking about ESP and understanding it is the fact that it really does enhance your life. Like, this knowledge is so beneficial to people for so many reasons. And I mean, to me, it makes me feel less powerless. It makes me feel, I mean, to me, it's such a of great benefit. And I mean, to not have that discussion, it's like, talking about cereal and not discussing the milk. It just very
Right.
strange. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
very strange. And it bleeds into this third case that I wanted to touch on before we have to wrap up, which was the choking ghost.
I
And
had a feeling you were going to go there. Yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
because I think, again, it's like lending into the stuff we don't heal up or don't understand or don't pay attention to begins to present itself. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. Let me just kind of set the little foundation here. There's something called the placebo effect. That is, placebo effect is a positive effect when somebody thinks that they're being healed or get a medication that's going to do something for them. There is a psychological component of it, but it really is a mind-body effect
Yeah.
in that people can believe that whatever treatment they're getting actually will work better than it actually can. And in the typical use of placebo is to tell someone that this pill or this injection is a medication. It's going to fix you basically, and to have people then say whether or not they're feeling better or actually to see physical change in the body in a positive direction. The pharmaceutical industry often benchmarks their research against placebo. And the sad thing is that a new medication only has to be a certain percentage above the placebo effect when they do controlled studies to go on the market, even though that medication will have enormous number of side effects potentially, and the placebo effect does not usually have any negative side effects.
Wow.
So that's number one. So there's a reverse of that. There's something called the nocebo effect. This is what happens often in curses that people supposedly have, or negative energy thrown against people, all those kinds of things. A good example of that would be somebody who is extremely suggestible under hypnosis. The hypnotherapist or hypnotist will take a pencil and say it's a red hot iron poker, and they will touch the skin, and that person will almost immediately get a blister.
Wow. Hey?
That's not possible from a physics perspective, because that pen or pencil or pen, it's just not hot
Sure.
at all. This is something that we are unconsciously doing to our own bodies, and it's a psychokinetic effect by definition, because it's mind over matter. Your mind is making something happen to your body. We usually think of PK as outside ourselves, but it also can affect us internally too.
Absolutely.
So this case you mentioned, was a call we got from a woman who was an ex-cop. She had been a cop police officer in San Francisco for a number of years. She got divorced. She moved like 10 years before she called us. She moved up to Alaska, getting far away from everything. She had a drinking problem originally. She was able to kind of clean herself up in Alaska. She works as a cop up there. She came back. She got a job in high-tech security, so she's still carrying a gun. Her coworkers were either ex-cops or ex-military police in Silicon Valley, and she was being choked, she said, by this big shadowy figure is grabbing her by the throat and kind of squeezing hard and sometimes lifting her off the ground. So we had her come into the office. This is back again when we had our graduate parapsychology program. She actually brought a coworker with her. She came in with a scarf around her throat. She takes the scarf off. She's got bruising on her throat.
Wow.
At which point, my colleague Sharon Salfin, Sharon Frankmont, after she got divorced, Sharon says, "Do you have a boyfriend?"
Yeah.
That was number one. No, she did not. And then she says, "My colleague here, my coworker, he saw what happened. He saw an attack, one of the attacks." So she goes on to tell us that she was at just before, like a week before, she was at her boss's house for a barbecue. They all were. And she went in to use the bathroom. And she comes out of the bathroom. There's the shadow figure. And she screamed, and everybody came running. And the shadowy figure, picks her up off the ground and is holding her against the wall above the ground. And then, as people got there, her coworkers got there, lets her go. And she's
Yikes.
right. That's what she said.
Yeah.
Turned to the guy and said, "What'd you see?" He said, "Well," and he apologizes to her and says, "None of us saw you off the ground. We saw you sliding. Your feet were already on the ground. You're sliding to the floor. What we did see, however, is bruising appear where there had been none before. So we actually watched it show up." Right. So that's the first piece. So we're going to go now to where many of the attacks happened, which was the apartment she was living in with her mother. So Sharon and I go to this little town called Pacifica, south of San Francisco. They got a great. The woman has her mother had a one-bedroom apartment facing the ocean, right near a beach, and Margie had actually come down when she moved back. She was still. This was 6 months before she started living with her mother until she got enough money to actually get her own place. Right. So we're talking about things. Margie, she had a number of psychic experiences. She actually had an interesting precognitive dream about a neighbor's kid dying in the surf and a riptide, and that actually happened. And she tried to warn the woman, and the woman actually now has been avoiding her because of that. So a few months before, it's kind of like midway into living in this place, she starts seeing the shadow figure. It's grabbing her by the throat. It's choking her, obviously not killing her in any way, shape, or form. She's telling us this. We're talking to the mother, and I'm sitting facing the sofa where she's sitting. To my right is the actual sliding glass window to the balcony facing the ocean, with Sharon and the mother with their backs to that. They're facing the kitchen. Margie gets up at one point and asks if whether or not anybody here want water, a glass of water? She's going to get some water for herself. She says, no. So she goes to the sink. She turns on the water, after getting a glass, turns it off, walks over to the hallway, looking towards the front door, looks down towards the front door like she heard something, goes back, does it again. Sharon's engrossed in talking to the mother. I'm watching her moving back and forth. And of course, this is the point at which in every movie you start hearing the spooky music, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's clear something's about to happen. So I'm watching her very closely. She turns on the water, gets some water glass, takes a sip, puts it down, turns around, screams, puts her hands up on either side of her head. I was already off the chair, kind of going quickly towards her. I caught her as she fell to the ground, so she didn't hit the ground hard.
Sure.
Sharon comes running over, not having seen what was going on in time. Margie is barely able to say anything. Get it off me, get it off me. We see her throat bulge out like a bullfrog's,
Jeez.
and then finger depressions, 4 on one side, 1 on the other. She again squeaks out, "Get it off me." I start pretty much I had only been back from New York, I don't know, for about a year. So I became a good New Yorker again and used some choice language to tell it to leave her alone. And to our surprise, it stopped immediately. She is getting bruising, but the throat thing goes down. She's able to talk again. I then said, "And you'll never bother her again," because you have to say things like that. And we sit her down, calm her down about this. She tells us she saw the figure and the whole bit. "Thank you for saving me." Okay, like I really did. And then we start asking some questions. First of all, her mother says, "You should probably tell them about the nightmares you're having."
Mm.
Okay, so shortly after she moved back to the Bay Area, she starts having nightmares of her father molesting her as a child.
Oh no.
Her father had been dead for a number of years. All right, so that's happening. She's seeing a therapist for the nightmares because this is recovered memory. She's in her like late 30s. That is a time that people often start having recall of those kinds of repressed memories of events. And the therapist doesn't know anything about the attacks because she's always wearing a scarf when she goes in there. She didn't want the therapist to think she was crazy.
Sure.
So then the mother starts talking about the woman's son. I mean, she had left the Bay Area, left her son with her ex-husband. The kid was now 16 because she left when the kid was 6. And Sharon's looking around and says, this is a 1-bedroom apartment. Where do you sleep, Margie? And she said, well, this sofa is actually a, convertible. It pulls out into a bed, queen size bed. And then Sharon's a psychologist, by the way, also a psychic. And she says, where does your son come and visit you? And she says, yeah, every so often there's a weekend here. Where does your son sleep? Well, there's not a lot of room here. My mom has a single bed, so my son sleeps in the bed with me. At that point, I then asked, when was the first nightmare?
Yeah.
And she said, the mother says, it was pretty much a couple days after the first time my grandson came here. And they're getting kind of like a dawning light in their eyes.
Sure.
And then it turns out that when was the first attack? After the first time she went to see the therapist. So we were able to get permission to speak to the therapist, and it turns out the therapist had a really good insight after we told her about the attacks and all that. She said, well, people who recover memories like this often feel guilty. It's one of the reasons they're coming to therapy is they feel guilty like they did something wrong.
Right.
And talking about it enhances that guilt because now they're telling on the person.
Yeah.
And the figure was there to shut her up. It was her own shadow side causing her to have this nocebo effect to try to to keep her from talking about things.
Wow.
Most of the attacks happened right before or right after she went to see the therapist. By the way, she never had another attack after the attack in front of us, partly because the therapist was right on top of things. We did this really quickly to help her out with that. But that's the kind of thing that would obviously been a great episode for Ghost Adventures or Paranormal State or something else because it was a demon, obviously.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it was a demon from within herself, kind of a monster of the id.
I had a case very similar to this. This was about, I don't know, 6 years ago or so. And it was a young woman who had a young son who was about 3 years old. And she had just gotten remarried to this super nice guy. Her life seemed to be going pretty good. And all of a sudden there was this same type of scenario. It was like this entity sort of came out of nowhere, was really seemed very hyper interested in her son. The son apparently was seeing it in his room, but it was attacking her, and it didn't have any interest, or whatever it was didn't seem to have any interest in the husband, but she was getting brutalized, and it was to the point where they were actually sleeping in their van because they believed that this thing was just running around their house. And when I talked to her, because it was this type of case that came to mind, and I said, well, what have you got going on emotionally? And then immediately she said, oh no, my life is great, everything's great, blah blah. And when I hear that, and you see this type of phenomenon, as something's off, like something's wrong. You can't be zipping along and having a good time, and nothing's going on, and have this type of thing go on. And the more I talked to her, the more finally she released the information that she had actually just left a really abusive relationship with a boyfriend prior, who was doing every last thing that she was describing this entity had been doing. And I said, well, have you been getting help for that? Like, what have you been doing to heal that up? Oh, no. That was in the past. No, it's fine. I'm like, okay, but this guy essentially tried to kill you. That leaves a mark, and whatnot. And so anyway, long story short, it was sort of the same thing where, sort of pushed her in the direction of therapy and trying to heal some of this stuff. And that's what began to heal the situation and let this go. But it's absolutely incredible how much of this stuff is unhealed crap that we've got.
Yeah. Trauma, fear, all of those things are a real problem. And unfortunately, I hear, I actually had a little online argument with somebody the other day. I was trying to just simply provide my perspective on things, and apparently didn't take well because he thought it was demonic and all that. There's a religious aspect to it as well. So much of it's us, and if we didn't have fear of these things, we could actually look into ask questions of what's actually going on to determine what's really happening.
Yeah.
That's not to say there couldn't be a ghost who's annoying.
Yeah, sure. And I think, yeah, I mean, just that. And I think for the audience too, we're not saying that there's no conscious spirits that are out there. I mean, there's plenty of cases that are that. But I think in so many cases, that self-examination is really worth doing. Because, I mean, if you've got a situation like this, I mean, you can't be trying to solve or you don't want to be trying to solve or diagnose the wrong problem, because at that point you're just racing around banging your head against a wall that's not going to fix anything. Well, just to wrap up here, Loyd, what would you suggest for people in a situation, maybe not as extreme as this, but what would you suggest to them to sort of start self-introspection about what might be happening around them?
Sure. Well, even if they didn't want to accept that they might be putting this stuff out themselves, thinking about what is going on in their life that would have attracted some outside force to do this to them.
Yeah.
That's number one. The second thing is, I think it's really important to ask questions, like how we determine, are we dealing with a conscious entity, or is this an imprint? Is this a recording, essentially? And the interaction's the most important thing. So speaking to, or, just trying to communicate with what's going on, even if it's yourself, it's just physical phenomena. Usually if it's just physical phenomena, we tend to point that back to living people, because with cases that are physical and have an apparition or it's related to haunting, there's some other stuff going on. Sure. So it's really important to understand what is going on in my life that could cause me to have these experiences. When people have problems with their technology, they should think about, where was I having the problems when I was really, really frustrated or anxious about something? And the odds are there's a pretty good chance of that, unless there's a problem with their technology in general, a physical problem in the computer, for example. We have plenty of studies that show so much of this comes from us, and we misinterpret, just like people misinterpret the residual haunting stuff completely. I mean, it's annoying, and it can be scary because you don't know what it is. But if it's not conscious, if it's just a recording of a past event, you can get pretty much block it out just knowing that that's what's going on. So asking questions of what the phenomena really could be, but asking questions about what's going on in my life that could cause me to have a reaction like this or attract things to me like this.
Mike, you and I, we talk about this a lot, where
we do,
just looking around us and going, understanding, I think, first of all, that this world, it really is a bit of a mirror as to how we're really feeling and what we're projecting. And I think when we can take that kind of responsibility, then that's when things can really start to shift and change. And it's so important. And that's one of the reasons why I really love this book, is that it provides examples of so many different strange and bizarre types of phenomenon that go on, but it's such an empowering read, because you really get to understand how much of it is influenced by just little old us.
yeah and the book also has a couple of cases that, as you read, that are not paranormal but seem to be, which is another thing that people really need to look at when things are going on. And it's really about understanding the phenomena and understanding what's going on. Again, that's not to say that there are not some things that happen to people that seem scary up front or might be annoying. I have never run into an evil entity, but I've certainly run into some where the person who used to be alive, when they were alive, they were an a-hole or a bully.
Yeah.
And they're still behaving that way. Their personality hasn't changed. So you treat them that way, and also know that living people have more power than the dead do.
Perfect lesson. Thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this. Where can people find the book? Because they need to all go out and buy it. It's amazing.
The book is not available in print or Kindle, of course, on Amazon.com. It is also available on in print on other booksellers, Barnes and Noble and other booksellers. But really, online is where you're going to find it these days.
Yeah, and follow Professor Paranormal here on Facebook and whatnot. That he does some absolutely amazing Q&A sessions. You guys, if you want to ask more questions about this, find out more information, definitely do that, because it's your sessions are great, and it's such a great resource for people to get information. And I get so many questions. Where can I find this? Where can I find that? And you provide so much fantastic content that if people can follow you, that would be great. Where can they do that?
Yeah, so for the Q&A, it's my Ask Professor Paranormal YouTube channel, and it's just simply youtube.com/at Ask Professor Paranormal, just spelled out. Folks can email me. It's either askprofparanormal@gmail.com or profparanormal, P-R-O-F as in professor, paranormal@gmail.com. Those are the easiest places. I do have a Facebook page. It's loyd.auerbach.author on Facebook. And you can also follow me on X at Prof Paranormal, or on Threads, just simply Prof Paranormal.
Awesome.
This is awesome. Thank you so much for doing this, because we love having you on anyway. But
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Wow. Once again, Loyd didn't disappoint. He has so many interesting cases to talk about, and I'm so envious of this guy. Like, what? How do you get involved in all this stuff? Like, I guess now, because people know who he is, he's just always involved. But it just seems like there's always something new, and there's always something interesting, and he talks about things that not everybody else is talking about, and I think that's what makes him so interesting.
And he's had such a plethora of cases and various phenomenon that he's been able to document, which I think is really unique. And what I love about Loyd is that there's no silly business. None of this, Hollywood crazy, doing it for clicks,
right?
Information. This is the real thing. And I think it's really important for people to grab on to people like Loyd for their information. I get the question a lot emailed to me: how do I get involved in this field? What do I do? And his classes are one of the first things that I tell people every single time. I say, go to the Rhine. The Rhine, Rhine research. Loyd's teaching out of there. He teaches these classes. You got to go and pick up on some of them, because it's the real thing.
The Rhine has such a storied history. Like, they've been around for so long. It's not some fly-by-night thing that somebody just cooked up,
Not at all. And I mean, J.B. Rhine, for people who aren't familiar with him, he used to be a professor of botany, and he actually quit his tenured professor job to go to Harvard, study psychology, and became a parapsychologist. And he started, first he was at Duke University for many years, and then started the Rhine. And now the Rhine is one of the chief places to go for paranormal courses. It's a phenomenal organization. And, Loyd's just one of the incredible teachers there.
I always think, would I ever love to go down into California and just hang out with Loyd while he does his thing somewhere? Just be his sidekick for a while.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, there's such great cases, especially in this book, that he's really touched on, and it shows a diversity of the type of phenomenon that you can experience. Everybody thinks that it's a haunted house with a spirit in it. Well, it's more complicated than that,
right.
And he's able to dig through, especially in this book, and we've talked about some of the cases here today, but he's able to really dig through and get to the bottom of some of this really weird phenomenon, like psychokinesis and projecting things with our minds and all sorts of strange things that people might attribute to a typical ghost, and it's so much more.
Yeah. Well, more about Loyd in his book, so you can buy that wherever you buy your fine books. Oh, yeah. And my book, too, is coming up as well. You'll see that on the bookshelves on October 1st, Strange, Spooky, and Supernatural. You can even pre-order it if you want. I know a guy. I know a guy. But you can pre-order it anywhere you order books from. If you're in the States, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Canada, for sure, Indigo, Chapters, and again, Amazon. So wherever you are, please pick up a copy of my book. I would love you forever for it.
Oh, it's so exciting. There's going to be so many awesome, amazing cases in there that people have not heard of. And
some you will have, some you will have,
and
heard
some
of.
You will have.
Yeah.
Yes. But new takes on things, which is really cool. And it's on my website as well. You can pre-order it on entityseeker.ca. So no matter where you go, you can find this new one, and it's going to be great. So everybody get out there and spend money on it.
Spend money on my book. Morgan writes the foreword. So
I do write the foreword. So it was my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this eerie expedition, dear listeners.
And remember, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. All is consciousness. Until next time, stay curious, friends.
Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings and Good Egg Studios. This podcast is part of the Curious Cast podcast network. Theme music by Corey Johnson of Catalyst Records in Edmonton, Alberta. You can learn more about Morgan Knudsen at entityseeker.ca and learn more about me, Mike Browne, and listen to my show, Dark Poutine, at darkpoutine.com. Feel free to email the show at supernaturalcircumstances@gmail.com.